Yay. Good morning, everyone. Good evening. Oh, I'm so sorry. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Cheeky Natives. My name is Alman Elisha Gcele, and I'm so excited about today's guest and, of course, about today's conversation. Yes.
Yay!
Um, Letlokonolo, who of course is an important part of the Cheeky Natives, is our co-founder. Who's our co-founder is actually not online today, but only because Letlokonolo was actually one of the judges for the Kane Prize 2022 and flying the flag very high. So congratulations, we're super proud of them. And today I have the extreme honor and like the pleasure and every awesome thing that you can think of to introduce today's guest, who is Tia Williams. I'm going to read her bio because it's always important for you to know the kind of great company that you're in, but also to just know that the Cheeky Natives are bringing you all the fire from everywhere. And I know you all read 7 Days in June and you're all just dying. So I have the pleasure to introduce Tia Williams, who had a 15-year career as a beauty editor for magazines including Elle, Glamour, Lucky, Teen People, and Essence. In 2004, she pioneered the beauty blog industry with her award-winning site Shake Your Beauty. She wrote the best-selling debut novel, The Accidental Diva, and penned two young adult novels, It Chicks and 16 Candles. Her award-winning novel, The Perfect Find, is being adapted by Netflix for a film starring Gabrielle Union. Her latest novel, 7 Days in June, is published by Grand Central. Welcome, Tia. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and to talk to you.
We're super excited as well. And I mean, having read both of your books, it's quite interesting to see, I guess, the growth in the writer that you are from when you wrote this book to
Mm,
7 Days in June. And I think for people who may not know, this is not a new book per se. This is a book that you published before, which is now being reprinted thanks to the success of 7 Days in June, but also just all the amazing work that you're doing. So congratulations. That is absolutely an amazing feat. And I guess it leads me to the first question, which is, for people who began with your work and who sort of started with 7 Days in June, who then read this book, what do you think is the biggest difference in the ways in which you have changed as a writer, but also some of your ideas around writing romance and writing relationships and what great relationships look like?
what has changed? So I published The Perfect Vine in 2016 and 7 Days in June was 2020. So there were 4 years between them. Um, I've always been a romantic my entire life since I was a little kid. Like I grew up reading my mom's, 80s paperback romance novels, and no matter what situation I'm in, I always see life through the lens of like great romance, even when I'm watching like CNN or like a news show and I'm looking at the news anchors and I'm like, I wonder if they're having a torrid romance behind the scenes. Like it's just always I'm putting people together like at all times. So that's something that is consistent in all of my books, that there's a big love story and that I really like to build a case for the couple so that it's not the kind of thing where you're just told they're in love. Like I like for it really to play out for the reader. So, through dialogue and the situations that they're in, especially through dialogue. And so by the time they do get together, you're like, finally, and it's just so obvious and right to you. So that's something that's definitely consistent between the two of them. I was in two very different places when I wrote The Perfect Fine and 7 Days in June. The Perfect Fine, which is about a former big time fashion editor at a fashion magazine. She's 40 years old. She loses her job. She loses her fiance. She loses her home, like all at the same time. The rug gets pulled out from under her. And then she has to reinvent herself working for an online magazine, and her boss is her former frenemy from the 90s, and everyone that works there is half her age, and she falls in love with a guy that's 22. And I kind of had a situation like that where I'd been working in magazines my whole life, you know, it was right at that time that everything was going digital. I didn't really know anything about digital, and I found myself laid off. I couldn't get a proper job for 3 years, and that's when I wrote The Perfect Find, because I was in Jenna Jones's shoes. And then 7 Days in June happened. I had gotten a job again by then, but I have chronic migraines, which I've had my whole life, and they'd gotten pretty severe, and I was having a hard time balancing being a single mom, a tween, and writing my books and working my day job and just trying to live life. So I came up with Eva Mercy, the protagonist of 7 Days in June, as someone who had the same problems as I do, but got a happy ending. And I sort of wrote it as inspiration for myself. So that's the difference between the two books.
I'm really okay. So the characters in The Perfect Find are low key exasperating, but particularly Jenna. And I think we need to talk about Jenna because Jenna, Jenna, you know, and I'm curious about for you as somebody who was writing Jenna, what was the experience? So, you know, there are authors who tell you that the character comes to sit with them, and that's how and has a conversation, and they discover the character. But when I think of Jenna Jones is like, oh my god, she is like codependent in like a package. Do you know what I mean? Like Jenna is 40 years old, so she's experienced this milestone birthday. But as you've described, Jenna's also somebody who experiences sort of profound loss, right? So the loss of a relationship, the loss of a home, but also the loss of the identity, right? So she's had this job and she's flourished in this job and people respected her. She then also loses that. So there's a professional standing, personal standing, home, etc. And then there's this milestone age. And I'm particularly interested in Jenna because I think of what it must be like to reach a particular age and not feel as though you've ticked off all the boxes, right? So the ideas of what you should have together at 40, and Jenna has none of those things. And I'm really curious about Jenna as a character and what was most difficult to write about her.
Well, I was Jenna. So what was difficult about it was even putting pen to paper and like being vulnerable enough to tell this story. I mean, the thing that's so hard for Jenna and for myself at the same time was that we were very ambitious very early, and she had a list of accomplishments she wanted to reach that she made in college. So did I. We had both reached all of these things by the time we were like 27 or 28. And then you think, well, I've done everything right. You know, I got the dream job, I got the guy, I owned the property, we got, you know, but there's no guarantee. Like the universe does not owe anyone a happy ending, unfortunately. And the universe also doesn't owe anyone an easy time of it. So you may get the happy ending, but you know, there may be a journey there. And it's kind of the thing where you think you know what you want until it's taken away, and then you have to start over. And Jenna was very surprised by what was in front of her once all of the trappings of her success were stripped away. And I think what's hard about that is that you want things to unfold in this very linear way. Like, and you kind of are told, you go to the right college, you get the job, like you do all these things, you save your money, you know, you be responsible, and you think that it's all going to work out. And sometimes it just doesn't. And that's life. It's not the fairy tale, but sometimes, you know, an even better fairy tale can come out of that struggle.
I want to talk about the Arts of Reinvention. And I'm particularly interested in Jenna's setting because Jenna, like you're saying, moves from not having an Instagram account to doing this. I don't want to give away too much of the book because we still want people to buy the book before it's on Netflix. But you know, there's an act of reinvention, and I often think about how Black women in particular are denied the opportunity to reinvent themselves. So the way that structural systems are set up in place, often if you make a mistake at a particular time in your life, that is defining forever. And the grace to redefine yourself and to reinvent yourself is often not extended to us. So you lose your job at 40 and that's it for the next 10 years. Your life just absolutely spirals. Jenna is an example of having to reinvent yourself, and I think it's so interesting that she used the backdrop of print moving to digital, but also this woman who feels like she knows it all, having to really be schooled by people who are half her age. And I want to talk about the gift that is reinvention for a lot of characters in this book, because a lot of people in this book have to reinvent themselves or reimagine new ways of being.
Right. I think, when I was writing this, it was at a moment where I was looking around and almost everyone I knew, every woman I knew was starting over, and we were not young. We were all between like 37 and 42, right? Like I have a girlfriend who had a chain of really fancy nail spas in Brooklyn and had just closed them and decided to go into real estate. Like, I had a girlfriend who had moved across the country, and it was just like, wow, is something in the air? Or is this the age where we kind of like reassess, and think, am I happy? And if not, do I have the courage to throw myself into something new at this age? And what I was finding was that, yeah, a lot of women I knew were finding that courage. And it was really moving to me, because it's not, I mean, I had a friend who was running some of the, most famous magazines globally, who dropped everything to move to the Midwest and start her own company. And the bravery that takes. And it's something that's real, like reinvention. You have to save yourself. You have to be your advocate. Like if you run into, if you stumble in your life, like you have to figure out how you're going to be your savior. And it was interesting to me to write that journey for Jenna, because she was so used to success, and she was so used to everything unfolding in the right way for her. And there's a line in there somewhere that she says something like, when you're young, you don't think about things not working out. It just feels like success is ordained. Like, well, of course this is successful. I tried it. I did it. Like, I'm owed this. And when you get older and you learn more about the world, how the world works, you realize that that's not necessarily true. So learning those lessons and finding new worth and value in a brand new life, and also the strength that comes from knowing that you orchestrated your own comeback. Like, who can take that away from you? No one. What can't you do if you were at the bottom and then you completely, manifested the top for yourself?
The relationships, I like that you're speaking about courage, because I think that the relationships in this book require a lot of courage. So I think
Mm-hmm.
of the relationship between Jenna and Darcy. And I love relationships between women that aren't great, right? Because we are often told that women can't have conflict. So I can't just dislike Tia because I dislike you.
Mm-hmm.
We have to have that dislike move beyond the interpersonal and translate it into how women don't support each other and how women don't care about each other and the like. And I love that she explored almost that frenemy relationship between Darcy and Jenna. And I want to talk a little bit about women who don't get along and why it's so important to actually have that demonstrated, right? Why you felt that was an important relationship to represent. Because of course that relationship is contrasted with the beautiful, supportive friendships that Jenna has, which are long-standing. They're amazing, right? But the relationship that helps her really put her life together is the one that she has with Darcy.
Yeah, well, I love a supervillain, and I don't think we have enough Black female villains, like real villains, not just like, kind of nasty or like a little bit, bitchy. Like I wanted a real, just like fire breathing, bitch, and because it's just fun, like Diane Carroll on Dynasty, like just coming into the room and everyone's like, you know, shaking in their boots. I love that. I love the camp of it. I love the drama of it. But then also Darcy, even though she's a villain, we know why she is. It's not an excuse for her behavior, but understanding where she comes from makes her actions not just comic booky. Like she's it's real. Like she's dealing with real trauma, like from her childhood. And I've always really enjoyed that dynamic between, like, in fiction and movies and TV. I love that thing of like the female protagonist up against a female antagonist. And I don't see it enough with Black characters. And I think that also it's because for so long we wanted to make sure that we at least get a good representation when we write about ourselves. But we run the gamut and we are all things. So yeah, like I love that. And also, for Jenna coming up against the, the roadblock that is Darcy around every corner, it gives her something to fight against, something to rail against, something to overcome, energy to beat, and it like gives her, lights even more of a fire under her to succeed.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think that the relationship between Jenna and Brian was particularly heartbreaking for me. Because I think that's where you see Jenna at her most vulnerable. So even without giving away too much of the book, but even the second interaction that they have. So they have this interaction, they break up, and then there's a second interaction. And you see the ways in which Jenna is almost still, I want to say that she's expectant, but also you see how her relationship with Brian was never going to be one of equals, right? So Brian, in many ways, is like he ticks the box, and he's like this idea of perfect, right? Brian is successful, he has it together, he's rich, he affords her a life of luxury, but Jenna is not the best version of herself when she's with him. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
interested in that codependent, that dynamic of like, you can have somebody who you love, who is amazing on paper, but who doesn't allow you to step into the fullness of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means for a woman like Jenna, who is 40 and who's at a very particular point in her life as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you're dating someone who doesn't bring out the best in you, you're not going to bring the best of you anywhere. Like it's going to bring you down everywhere. Like it's so hard, and I'm speaking from personal experience. Like it's so hard to be your best self when your, quote unquote other half isn't bringing that out of you. And instead of helping you rise, they're like sinking you like a stone. It's and that's what Brian was. And I also, with Brian, the same with Darcy, I wanted to show that he's a person too. Like everyone is doing the best they can in the perfect find. Like I don't think the thing with like antagonists or villains or the X in a story, like they don't know that they're the bad guys. Like I had a creative writing teacher tell me, once, that all of your characters should behave like they just walked into your book from their own book. So like they're the star in their own story, just like in real life, we're all the main characters in our own story. So Brian thought he was doing the best that he could.
Brian was trashy though. Yeah.
Yes. Exactly.
Brian was quite trashy, and I think it's interesting because there's also a statement there, right, about like the seemingly good guy, right? That I think you made.
Mm-hmm.
And Brian often purports to be the good guy. He positions himself as the knight in shining armor. I've come to rescue you after absolutely turning your life around, upside
Mm-hmm.
down. But it also speaks about how men and cishet men often feel like they can completely disrupt the lives of the women that they have relationships with, go find themselves and sort themselves out. And because of the way that the world is structured, once he has sorted himself out, there will always be room for you to understand because he was just doing the best that he could. And I feel like that particular exchange is also a statement on like the danger or the skewedness of relationships, right? And in particular ways, whereas a Jenna could never just leave Brian's life upside down and then come back once she'd gone through a path of like spiritual enlightenment.
No, of course not. Like men, we're supposed to treat them like they're little boys, but also like our kings, which is a really strange dichotomy. Like I'm supposed to drop everything because you can correctly identify an emotion, or you have figured out how to apologize, or you finally reflected a little bit. I mean, Brian was not an evolved character at all. Like he didn't get it, and he really thought that, you know, him just coming back and saying, you know, I can give you the world. Isn't this what you wanted? Without even listening to her and what she really did want. And he thought that that was going to do it. And I feel like we all know men like that, you know, whether they're our dads, our ex-husbands, whatever, our brothers, like, you know, the world treats them differently, you know, as they're on their journey to figure out who they are. Men are given a lot more grace than us.
Mm. Speaking of men, oh, the men in this book were a challenge. I know
Yeah.
everybody is just like so in love with Eric, but I found Eric to also be quite a challenging character. And I think I want to speak to a few things. So the first would be the relationship between Eric and Jenna is interesting. Eric is 22, Jenna is 40. So
Hmm.
she is potentially old enough to be his mother, maybe not. But there is a reverse in the age gaps that we're not used to seeing in our community. So when you see an older man and a younger woman, of course, that's a dynamic that you see relatively often. But the older woman and the younger man is a very interesting dynamic. And I want to know why you wanted to explore this dynamic in the story of a woman who's really trying to get it together. Why Eric?
Because I went through it in real life. Not that exact story, but like, yeah, I definitely there was a real Eric. Um, and you know, it was the age gap was really tough, and there was no way it could ever work because of that. Um, but I wanted to see if in fiction I could figure out a way to make it work. Um, and I left it kind of open ended. I'm not going to, you know, do any spoilers. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, what makes a relationship? I mean, they were totally compatible in terms of like
Mm,
their friendship and like what they liked, what they were into. They were finishing each other's sentences. It wasn't just sex at all, you know, like
mm,
they had insane chemistry, but they were also like they thought the other one was funny and infuriating and interesting, and they were inspired by the other person's art. Like there was a lot, there were layers between them, and you really can connect with people, you
mm,
know, i- from totally different walks of life or totally different ages. Or, you know, I'm married to a guy that grew up an hour from Copenhagen. Like I'm from DC. Like it doesn't make um sense on paper, but sometimes like your people are just your people, right? um I think in real life, at a certain point, that gap would be a bridge too far.
Mm-hmm.
But in fiction, it's it's a fairy tale. It's a fantasy.
It is. And I think that it's interesting because I want to speak a little bit about that because I think they had such a beautiful relationship that also forced me to confront some of my own ideas, right? Because often we think like that age gap is just ridiculous, but also something that's potentially insurmountable. But the person, the idea of somebody having a PhD in you is particularly interesting to me. Um, and there's a lot of romance, right? But Eric is not. He's not romantic in the way that you would think, but Eric is a romantic man, right?
Yeah.
And I think that you've written around alternative ideas of romance and what it can mean, outside of the Disney princess and prince and
Hmm.
because I mean we had Brian who was like the king of these big, extravagant,
Right.
ostentatious gifts. And then there's Eric who just like understands and knows. And I guess the question for me is, does it have to be either or? Because I mean Eric and Brian really represented opposite ends of the spectrum. There is no middle ground. But I'm interested in the kind of romance that you see in the book that develops between Jenna and Eric, because Eric is romantic. He's just not romantic in the way that we think of romance conventionally.
Right. Well, I think it's about what's romantic to you. Like Jenna wasn't really moved by the grand gestures like that. She thought she was, but when she met Eric, she realized it wasn't really about that. It's about eating Skittles in her bed and watching TV with a guy who knew her inside and out. That's romance to her. Romance to her is sitting at a crowded bar talking with this guy about German
Mm.
expressionist cinema. That's romantic to her. Like through him in that relationship, she's discovering who she is too. It's like, oh, this was what I wanted this whole time. Like like these small moments and this like meeting of the minds and you know us understanding each other's references on a photo shoot without even having to explain it. People looking at us like, what are they even talking about? That's romance. Um, but that, for someone else, that ain't it. For someone else, it's a diamond, or for someone else, it's a trip. Um, you know, so it's really about like finding what moves you. And myself as a writer, like I just me myself personally, like the Disney princess stuff doesn't do it for me. Like the roses and the chocolates and the picnic and the rose petals on the bed. Like just for me, that's not it. Like those like tiny sparks of connection. That's the stuff I live on forever. And so that's what I like to create in a book because I feel like anyone can, get on Pinterest and get an idea of like how do you romance a lady, um I think those really small personal moments feel bigger to me sometimes than the grand gestures.
What I found really interesting in the book, excuse me, that's something that also I think has come up a little bit often is sort of the divide between the younger generation and potentially people who are a little bit older, right? And it often feels like this great big divide that can never be crossed. But what's really funny is how Jenna navigates the interactions with her younger colleagues. So she starts off being initially very standoffish and feeling like, "Oh, I know better than these children," almost as though they're beneath her. But as the book develops, you also see Jenna develop a sense of empathy and an appreciation for her younger colleagues. And I wanted us to talk a little bit about that, like the ways in which, outside of her relationship with Eric, because I mean, she's particularly invested in bridging that gap. But outside of that relationship, the gap and the understanding that you see her explore with her younger colleagues is something to behold, right? Like there's something about seeing intergenerational friendships between women, particularly, that is always so intriguing to me.
Yeah, I think, well, she figured out that she didn't know anything. You know, like, she came into the job like, "I'm gonna teach these kids, how it all works," and she very quickly realizes that she's in over her head, and she needs to stand back and let the 25-year-olds teach her about this new world. It takes place in 2012, so, like,
She
digital
doesn't
was
have an
still
Instagram account.
what?
And she doesn't have an Instagram account.
Right, and she doesn't have Instagram, like, she doesn't do social media, like, she's, like, from the dark ages, which, I was too. Like, that's, all of us print magazine editors had a huge education when it was time, when digital came into our lives and we realized that we need to learn this and fast if we're
Mm.
gonna stay relevant. So there were a lot of those moments happening in real life where I'm in a meeting and people start talking about SEO, and I'm like, what is SEO? Search engine optimization. Basically, like when you put keywords in a headline so that when people Google something, your article will pop up. I had never heard of this before. Um, so that's when you realize, like, oh, okay, you may have 15 years experience over these people, but your experience isn't transferable right now. So now is the
Mm.
time for you to learn from these people who just got out of college, who are natives in this world that you are really just visiting. And I think through that, Jenna learned the value of the millennial, being a Gen Xer. Um, she learned the value of staying quiet and listening and learning. And through that, she learned how to be a good friend to this younger generation, a good friend and a good girlfriend. Like, she wasn't condescending, she wasn't a know-it-all. She met them where they were and she respected them for what they had to teach her.
Speaking about being a good friend, I loved Billy and Elodie. Like, I think they were some of my favorite characters in the book. Um, Firstly, because we see how, like in real life, Jenna's girlfriends help her pick up the pieces. But there are
Mhm.
also three women who are profoundly different and have
Mhm.
chosen different paths for themselves. And still, the love and the friendship is what is at the sense of how they relate to each other. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why those two characters were so important for you to write, but also why they were so profoundly different. Like, there's difference, and there's Billy, Elodie, and Jenna, who are all just
Mhm.
like, in any other world, they may not have even been friends.
Yeah, so so Billy is the protagonist of my very first novel, The Accidental Diva. So I was bringing her back for this one as kind of a gift to the readers that have been with me since the beginning. Um, and Elodie is Jenna's friend from, I forgot how they met. Or is it college or they grew up together? So it's kind of like that threesome where two people are friends with one person, but those two people aren't necessarily good friends with each other. So that's why the differences are so striking. And my life is kind of like that. Like, I have really good friends from different sort of eras of my life. And if you get them all in a room together, it's like, why are who put this assortment of disparate personalities in this room together? Like, it doesn't make sense, but they all represent different facets of my personality. um so that's kind of why I had them be so different, and then they were always like, you know bantering and annoyed with each other. Like, they're just not the same kind of person. Like, they wouldn't be friends on their own if it wasn't for Jenna.
I want to talk about the concepts of timing because that's something that comes up often in the book, right? So there's the idea of the perfect timing, like the time to have a child, be married, achieve certain career goals. But there's also the contrast between the idea of the timing not being great, but the person themselves being great, right? It's like right person, wrong time, and there's lots of feelings around that. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that, the idea of like the right person, the wrong time. as something that exists, but also just the concepts of timing and how you played with time in this book. Like in many instances, it feels like, Jenna will almost get it, or it's almost the right time, or this is Jenna's peak, and then it just doesn't happen, or like it happens, but there's something else, and it's almost like there's just never this perfect time thing that's happening in Jenna's life.
Because I feel like that's life. That's, you can plan, you can hope, you can dream, you can prepare, but you ultimately don't really have that much control over how things play out in your life. You can set yourself up for certain things to happen, but like you can't decide when you're going to fall in love. You can't decide when your career is going to hit. You can't decide when it's going to fall apart. You can't decide, you can sort of decide when you have a kid, but not even like that's up to science, like you can get
Cute.
lucky, but like, yeah, exactly. Yeah, like even if you were going to pursue adoption or IVF or something that you are controlling the process, you still can't control the outcome. And I think the older, and it's why people turn to spirituality and and sort of um embracing the unknown and just having faith and and a belief in something bigger than who you are, because there's only so much we can do. Um, and yeah, I mean, Jenna's life feels pretty random. Like I said, she has set herself up. She found the apartment. She got the job. She has learned how to shop at Target. I don't know what your equivalent. Do you guys have Target?
We have something like Targets. We have something like Targets, Walmarts. Yeah,
Yeah.
we could identify with Jenna having to downgrade to shopping at Walmart and having it together.
Okay, good. Um, yeah, like she's done all these things, but then like the way the story is going to play out and the rhythm of it and the cadence and the ups and downs, you know, like she has no control over that. And it all is pretty random, which makes for a fun
Darcy,
story.
it does. But Darcy's a super villain, and I say this because I think of her relationship with Eric, but also what plays out towards the end. That is like the stuff of like supervillainism, and I don't know about doing that to your own child, but I think her and Eric have a particularly interesting relationship, and I'm always interested in relationships between mothers and their children that aren't perfect, that are complex, that require the reader to think outside of this like paradigm of what we've been told around what is a mother and what is a good mother, but also the ways
Hmm.
in which we also think of Black women, and there's almost this like this mammying that we do. And I know we've spoken a little bit about understanding that Jenna had her own trauma, but there's a particular kind of trauma that I think she inflicts on Eric that we haven't spoken to, right? And that for me is a very interesting relationship in the book, because I also think it spills over into how they then relate to the other characters around them.
Hmm. Darcy is a monster. Like she's just a monster. And we learn a little bit about, like I said, we learn a little bit about why, like her childhood was wild. And, you know, seen through a different lens, like what a hustler. Like look at what she was able to accomplish with literally nothing. Like look at how she was able to come out on top, starting from absolutely nothing and being a teenage mom. And I think in her mind, she's like, look at what a gift I've given my son. Like look, I am the single mom badass. Like he's growing up, like I forget if they live in like a brownstone or in a fancy condo. But whatever it is, it's millions. And she's given him private schools and she's given him opportunities. What else is there? You know what I'm saying? Like to her, and I know people like that offer no warmth, no safety net, like no real like demonstrative love to their kids. but they are offering money and opportunity. And those two things are things that they did not have growing up. So they're like, what's the problem? How am I not mother of the year? I did this all by myself. This wealth, you have this name that can open doors for you. That's it. And so, you know, but Eric is from a generation that's like, okay, but can we hug? Like, I need you to be my mommy. Like, who even are you? Like, I was raised by nannies and, you know, your weird boyfriend. Yeah, so they're coming to each other from two totally different worlds. And like you said, it affects the way they relate to everyone. I mean, there's a argument to be made that Eric may have a mommy fixation. You know, like
Low key, high key, low
you
key, high key.
know, low key, high key. I mean, it's not, I don't think it's a coincidence that the love of his life is the same age as his mother.
But also, I think that Eric extends a lot of grace to his father, in ways that he wouldn't necessarily do for his mother, because there's almost an expectation that his mother would be a particular way, but there's a lot of space for his father to be imperfect and to have all of these human failings. And I think that there's a statement that you were making there around the ways in which we extend a lot of grace to the men in our lives in ways that people often don't for the mothers who sacrificed themselves, but also had to sacrifice of themselves. You think of what Darcy had to go through in order to be able to give Eric the nannies that he complains about. And this is not to excuse toxic behavior, but it's to say, in reading this book, I was really challenged to think a lot about how high the standards and the bar is for the mothers in our lives as opposed to the fathers. I mean, fathers really just have to exist and, you know, sometimes babysit you and, of course, then win Father of the Year and get venerated and romanticized in the way that Eric has really done for his father.
Absolutely. I mean, that happens because his father is a man, but also because, well, now I was about to spoil it.
Don't do it, Tia.
Okay, I
Don't do it.
won't. Let's just say the parent that he really knew and the parent that he grew up with was Darcy, and so she's going to get all of the blame.
Of course. I don't want to give away the ending, but I want to talk about happy endings. And Jenna is convinced, right, that like happy endings almost don't exist for her. And of course, you've seen Jenna just go through the motions and go through it all. And she gets a version of a happy ending. I'm not sure if that's a happy ending for her. But I wanted to talk about that ending without, of course, giving away too much. But why that particular ending in a book that's had so much timing go wrong and just be off? Jenna has a very particular happy, almost happy ending, and I want to talk about a little bit about that because I know that's also something that was a little bit controversial, right? Is that particular ending for Jenna, considering what the story has been, but also considering who Eric is at different points in the book.
Yeah, it's pretty controversial. I don't know how to talk about this without spoiling it. All I'll say really is that life is messy. And Jenna and Eric are messy. And what ends up happening with them is in line with that fact.
Why does Jenna choose? I found the decisions that Jenna made in the book very interesting. She knows about what Eric has sort of been deprived of because of what happened with his father and what Eric has liked. And I see her then do almost the same thing to Eric.
I think the reason because she wanted something for herself and was waiting 20 years for Brian to give it to her. And he never did. And she was tired of waiting on a man to get what she wanted. And given the opportunity to have this thing that she always wanted, she just couldn't see herself waiting for a man's approval or worrying about what a man thought or potentially ruining a man's life behind what she really wanted. It was a purely self-motivated decision, which I wouldn't have done, but I know why she did it.
And there's an interesting commentary around rethinking what we think of family. So in the book, you see sort of almost alternative ways of being. So you see this community of women come together to raise their children. And I think with renewed conversations around how we think around family and how we think about our families, I thought that was an interesting statement to make in a book like this. And why did you feel that was important to sort of stretch the reader's imagination as it relates to families? Because yes, the women are doing it alone, but their alone looks very different to what we imagine.
Yes, it's because I had just read, it was right at the beginning of, I'm from Brooklyn. I've lived in Brooklyn for the past 25 years. I'm from Virginia, but um, yeah, I had just read an article, I think in the New York Times or the New Yorker, about all of these communities that had started springing up, like these single woman, sort of platonic couple communities, like where you would just buy property with a couple of your friends who were, you know, divorced mothers or single mothers on purpose, and you raise your kids together. And it just was something that was starting to happen all around New York. And I was like, and I was, you know, as a single mother, I just thought that was so fascinating. I have a very lucky circumstance where my ex-husband, we have been co-parenting really well since our daughter was 11 months old. Like, he lives, you know, within walking distance. We share her. But I can't imagine, and I'm faced with this thought every day. I think this, oh my God, what if he was not in the picture? What the hell would I do? Like, I know her dad is up the street. Like, if I have an emergency at work, if there's something that I have, like, he's there, and vice versa. Like, a lot of women don't have that. And it just seemed, you know, reading about these communities that were springing up, I was like, hell yeah, like, why haven't we been doing this whole time? We haven't been doing this whole time because of patriarchy, you know, but it was just so liberating and refreshing to me to read about women that were just doing this, creating their own definition of family. And this was also around the same time where people, I don't know if I'm sure that you have the same thing, it's probably translated differently, but like here we call it framily, like friends that are family. And so there was this whole concept of like, look, if your actual family is toxic, have a family Thanksgiving, have a family Christmas, you know, celebration. Like, it's your found family that you know, that you're gonna adhere to, and that it doesn't serve anybody to try to force it with an actual family that isn't serving you. So that idea was starting to come into relevancy as well. So I was interested in that.
So we call it, Ntlhokhona is actually just made a comment. We call it chosen family here.
Okay.
And chosen family is of course how we think around it. But so this book of course is being translated to, is what has been adapted to film. And I want to know, as a writer, what are your feelings around your work being adapted to film? Do you feel like at that point the work is out there, you have given birth to the work is out, and you can therefore sort of remove your feelings around adaptations, or do you still feel very strongly like this is your child, and so of course you have particular feelings around how you'd want the adaptation to look?
So it's different for everyone. So The Perfect Find was adapted to a film, and it was my very first time dealing with Hollywood stuff, and I was a little intimidated. And so I was like, here, take my baby, like treat her well, I'll be over here. And I wasn't involved, which is a scary thing. It's like you're turning over your characters and your story, and you're like,
Mm.
ah. But it was in fantastic hands. But yeah, like you said, I do have to remove myself from the finished product, which I haven't seen yet, but they're working on the editing now. Because it's a different, um, it's a different art form, so you do have to kind of just give it away. With 7 Days in June, I am more involved. We haven't fully started the process yet, but yeah, it was optioned for a TV series, and I will be involved in that in a way that I was not with The Perfect Find. So that's going to be more of my hands are in it, but with The Perfect Find, they weren't, because I was just like, I don't know how, I didn't even know like the terminology they were using. Like, it
Mm.
truly is a different world.
And I mean, thinking of like the breakout success that both these books have been, particularly 7 Days in June, has that in some way changed your writing process? Knowing that, of course, there are people who have particular expectations. So when your book comes out, there are people who are going. When your next book comes out, there are people who are going to have particular expectations because they've now read 7 Days in June, and they've also then read The Perfect Find. And what does that then mean for you as a writer? I think we often think of like great publishing success for writers to be this amazing thing, but there's of course the flip side of what it means to now have an entire community of people who relate in very particular ways to your work and what that means for your creative process.
Yeah, it's really, really scary. I've never had so many eyes on my work before, and the correct answer would be, no, I don't think about the audience when I write. Like, I don't think about the reader. I just, you know, focus on my process and, maintain the integrity of every word. I mean, that's the goal, but like,
Mm.
it's hard to get those voices out of your head. And honestly, this is so weird, but like, social media is a gift and a curse. And the more I see raves about my work, the more scared I become.
Mm.
Like, oh God, it's never going to be as good as this, or they're never going to like this as much as that, or oh, I have to figure out how what did I do that made that person feel like that? Like, letting the reader get into your process is not a great thing for a writer.
Mm.
So sometimes I just have to completely divorce myself from social media and, you know, try to shut out the world, but it's hard.
Mm. So we've got a comment here, and it says that this conversation is so relatable in a post-COVID world and wanting to find the balance between capitalism and filling your cup. And not just, I guess, not just capitalism, but like all these other things that you have to be, and filling your cup. And so playing those multiple roles is quite interesting. And I think that was quite an interesting comment to come across in thinking about The Perfect Find.
Yeah, capitalism, she's bossy. um, but I think filling your cup is the most important. If you can manage to get money whilst filling your cup, I think that is, then you've really made it.
Dream. Thank you so much. Yeah, this has been such an amazing conversation. I'm going to ask you a controversial question that I know
Yes.
writers don't like. But after 7 Days in June, I have lots of questions. So, A, will there be a sequel to this? I need to know what happens with Eric and Jenna. Do they have the perfect happy ending? Hint, hint, hint.
Well,
But
Eric and Jenna
also
are
what's
in.
next?
Oh, okay. So Eric and Jenna make a cameo in 7 Days in June. So if you've read 7 Days in June, you know what has happened to them. And what's next is I'm working on a novel that was actually due on June 1st that was not finished by June 1st. So I'm wrapping it up now. I can't really say that much about it, but it has something to do with the Harlem Renaissance and a little bit of magic.
Okay. I'm very excited to hear this. I know we were all absolutely in love with 7 Days in June, and we can't wait for all the amazing stuff that comes out after this. We can't wait to see the Netflix adaptation with some of our faves, but also really just to congratulate you on having really two amazing books that we've just been able to speak about over the last hour. But also, I think the act of reinvention, and to see somebody come back and reinvent themselves and make themselves new over and over again is really inspiring, particularly for Black women. So thank you so much, Tia, and we can't wait to see what's next. I am going to go back to read 7 Days in June now that I've read this, because it'll just put everything together.
Yes.
But thank you once again for such an amazing conversation, and honestly, thank you just also for joining us and for being so open to our questions and some of the strong feelings we have about your characters. And I think that's the mark of a great book, is that people feel so attached to your characters that Jenna can drive you absolutely crazy. Almost forget that she's fictional. So thank you once again, Jen, and we really look forward to more conversations in the future, and of course the popcorn watching party as we wait for some of these adaptations.
Yay! Thank you so much for having me. The questions were fantastic. I had a ball.
Yay, thank you so much. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Please don't forget to subscribe to the Cheeky Natives on Spotify, Apple, and all other social media. We are the Cheeky Natives everywhere. And we look forward to some more exciting conversations coming up later on this month. Good evening and bye, everybody.
Bye.